Welcome to the Real Resiliency Podcast by TLC VR, where we discuss real resiliency journeys from people like you. Here are your hosts, Dr. Robert Goldman, Dr. Paul Meller, Dr. Webb Garrison, and Anika Kazembe.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Road to Resiliency. I'm Dr. Paul Meller, the Chief Innovation Officer here at TLC Virtual Resiliency. We're thrilled to be able to bring you these real stories of real-life resiliency. We're firm believers that telling stories and giving narratives are so important to help us learn from other people and to grow and to expand, especially in these times where we have so many stresses, and really learning how to be resilient to those stresses from other people. We are TLC Virtual Resiliency, a company that's designed to develop personalized and individualized business-to-business programs in building resiliency. Before we go on and talk about some of our own journey towards resiliency, let's introduce ourselves. So, Anika, can you please go first?
Sure. So, hello, I'm Anika Kazembe. I am the co-CEO here at TLC Virtual Resiliency. I am a nurse. I have been in the healthcare industry for just over 20 years. I am super excited to be a part of this journey on the road to resiliency with my colleagues and our guests.
Okay, thank you, Anika. Dr. Goldman.
So my name is Rob Goldman. I am a psychologist. I'm also an attorney. I started off first as a lawyer, then pursued my doctorate in psychology and really developed a passion, I think, as an attorney, wanting to help people and continue on as a psychologist, where I really focus on helping people, but maybe in a different way. I always keep my lawyer's hat on. People always ask me, are you a lawyer today or a psychologist today? And I say I'm a reformed attorney today. And by that, I mean looking at new ways of dealing with conflict, dealing with ways that you can be more resilient, and focusing on wellness and prevention. And that's really my passion.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. Webb, a little bit about you?
Sure. I'm Dr. Webb Garrison. I am also a psychologist. My first passion, however, was spirituality. So in my earlier studies, I focused on spirituality, and I came into psychology because it seemed like a kind of an expansion of a lot of the various spiritual principles that I had studied, and it felt like it was a practical way of kind of bringing spiritual intervention to everyday life. Having said that, I'm not a religious psychologist. The way that I define spirituality here really has to do with our broader sense of connection, meaning, and purpose. So I've been practicing for almost 30 years and have worked in a variety of capacities, from nursing homes to child welfare to private practice. And currently I'm focused more on private practice and education and supervision. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversations.
Thank you so much, Webb. And as I said before, my name is Dr. Paul Meller. I too am a psychologist, although not a reformed one. I've been working for the better part of the last 30 years in developing and implementing and evaluating programs to promote wellness, resiliency, and to prevent all sorts of difficulties in children and adults in multiple kinds of settings. I'm also a trainer of psychologists, and I've been working as a professor and trainer of psychologists for about 32 years. So I'm thrilled to be able to take all of that experience and all of that life experience, combined it into, as Webb was talking, multiple aspects of my life, especially combining mind, body, and spirit together and building resiliency. So over the next several episodes in our podcast, we're going to be bringing in guests to be able to discuss their own personal road to resiliency. Some of the guests will talk about some physical issues that they've had and illnesses that they've had, life circumstances that they've had, some issues of violence that they've had, and how they got to the place that they are right now in standing strong, standing focused, and feeling well and whole despite all the stresses they had. Before we get into that, I think it's important for everybody to get a sense of where we come on our own journey to resiliency. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about some, but not all, of the facets of our own personal road to resiliency. Other parts of that road will be unveiled to you in the course of the podcast as it comes up over the next several episodes. So, Rob, why don't we start with you and have you talk a little bit about your road to resiliency?
Well, thank you, Paul. And I just want to echo what you said before, because it's really the stories that inspire me to practice resiliency. And we can read it in a textbook and we can educate, but it's really individuals that really inspire me to learn about resiliency. And my story, one of many, is what happened to me when I was growing up, mostly during my public school days. I was picked on a lot because I was Jewish. I had pennies thrown at me. I was called a kike, and it was really hard to get through the day. When the bus would come, I would have bats in my belly, afraid about what would happen next. It culminated in me having swastikas drawn on my locker in junior high school. The first time it happened, I remember having a meeting with the principal and saying, "Don't worry about it. We're going to find out who did it." And I was really interested. And at first I wanted vengeance. I wanted to find these kids, and I really wanted them to pay for what they did. So we go out for lunch, and the next day, actually, I returned to lunch with my mom, and there were swastikas drawn again. And at that point, I really felt I had no choice but to leave my public school and go to a private school. Fast forward, I became the supervising psychologist at the Suffolk County Probation Department, and I was called to do an evaluation on a kid who, ironically, and perhaps Providence had brought me to this, to meet a kid who had put a swastika on in the bathroom, the same school that I went to, where my locker had swastikas on it. And I wanted to hate this kid so badly. I wanted to really, almost tell him off. I'm like, here's my chance. Here's my chance for vengeance. And when I sat down and I spoke to him, I realized that he's just a kid and he's a victim of his own circumstances. And that's when the empathy seeped in. And it really foreshadowed very much of what I did and what I would do in the future, because after getting to know him, I felt bad for him. And I think one of the things I learned is that it's easy to hate somebody from a distance, but when you have a true dialogue with them, that's when the empathy seeps in and the hate dissipates, because you see their real humanity. So when I worked in the jail, and I, would hear people commit these terrible crimes, I would often have to come to meet them, and I'd say, "There's no way I'm going to like this person." And then I saw that, real stories of their own suffering and tragedies that they had to deal with. That's when I really began to understand that hate is easy, but trying to understand the why, and that's where psychology comes in, is where the transformation is possible. And that's how I've tried to lead my life moving forward, is trying to get to the why and understand and seek empathy behind your enemy before you have that knee-jerk reaction to simply hate.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for sharing that. I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
In this world that we live in that is more and more polarizing every day, your story really tells me a path to maybe be able to create a sense not only in harmony in the people around us, but in harmony within ourselves. How do you apply that on your day-to-day basis?
Because, I try not to look at things globally. I try to look at things much more on an individual basis, and I challenge my beliefs all the time, my concreteness. And the world likes to react in the black and the white, the polarization that you speak to. And I try my best to really understand the person. So in my work, many of which is dealing with people who hate each other from court-referred matters. I try to get the conversation going. I try to get the dialogue going between two parties who, at this point in their life, can't stand each other. And I try to model the behavior of first seek to understand before to be understood. So really trying to test those waters and challenge people to try their best to not just think black and white, but really try to understand. And I try to model that, although I fall prey to the concreteness all the time. For me, it's easy. If you're a Mets fan, I like you. If you're a Yankees fan, move on. But that's easy. But constantly testing the concreteness that I view life from a prism, which I think we all view life that way, is a challenge. But I find that living that life is much more enriching.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I have one other question for you, Rob. And this is me keeping my psychologist hat on. And I have a hard time taking that one off all the time. One of the biggest roadblocks that people have in building their own personal resilience, on the one hand, is having a little bit too much faith in themselves, maybe a little bit too much conceit or too much hubris. But the other side of it is when people self-loathe and self-hate. So I'm curious how your story and how your experience has taken you to a place to feel better about hating within yourselves as well as outside to other people.
Yeah, well, I found that looking at things, my hate dissipated as I got to know this kid, because my hate became generalized to people who I felt were challenging who I was as a Jewish person. I was very reactive. And when I saw the humanity behind this kid, a lot of that anger dissipated. Now you can call it forgiveness, or letting go. I think it's very much the same. I felt much more confident in myself to challenge people by having an authentic dialogue.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you for sharing that deeply personal story. Anika, would you like to share with us a little bit?
Certainly. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rob, for sharing your story. I can certainly relate to parts of your story. As my story today is mainly from childhood experiences and resiliency in children, because we always say children are resilient, right? And they are most resilient. And I find that to be so true. I was born and raised in Jamaica, the island. And I think coming from a background that is island background requires a certain amount of resiliency on children and parents, alike. So for me, I had struggles even with school, like Rob described. I went through school in Jamaica, fairly comfortable amongst my peers and those of whom, we were similar. And when I moved to the United States, I had my challenges with school, because I graduated from high school and here had to go through some additional coursework to be accepted into college. And so I had to go back to high school for a semester. I had never been on a school bus before. So my first experience on the school bus was at age 16, almost 17. The very first day I went on the school bus, I was the only African-American, Black kid on the school bus. I got picked up and dropped off at school, and an all-white school. I felt comfortable, but I had no idea what I was in for. So needless to say, that was a really rough day. I was picked on for my clothes. I think a lot of the students had never really encountered Blackness or a Black person, let alone a Black kid. It was in a very predominantly white neighborhood. It's where my parents lived in the country. So the school that I would be having to go to was in that neighborhood. And so I'm at the end of the school day, after I've gone through such a rough day of being teased and picked on and bullied, which I knew nothing about coming from my background, took the school bus to get home. And each kid, first of all, I sat right behind the bus driver, and a boy came up to me and said, "You don't get to sit there," and I'm like, okay, well, this is where I'm sitting. And he and his friends really indicated, or they actually told me, and the bus driver was quite upset, that I needed to sit in the back of the bus. I didn't move. I sat where I was sitting. But I think I just made the situation worse for myself the remainder of the week. I went on the school bus for 2 additional days. Each day was really torture. I had eggs thrown at me, all sorts of things. And I remember I went home and I cried and I told my mom I would never get on the school bus again. That was horrible. And I had been, so for the next couple of days, my mom drove me to school and I had to make it through classes with these children. Some were very nice and others were just really, they saw an opportunity and someone to pick on that they, probably didn't have this opportunity before. But after the following week, I told my mom that I wanted to get back on the bus. And my mom says, "Well, why would you want to do that? After all you had been through." I said, "No, I'm getting back on the bus because I'm not going to let them stop me from riding the school bus." Now, that to me required a lot of strength and to be resilient, to tell myself that I'm not going to just cower and walk to school or have my mom be inconvenient to drive me to school and having to make it to work on time. So I started going, I went back on the school bus. The bus driver, who was very nice, said, "Wow, I'm effectively, I'm surprised you're back, but welcome back." And I sat right behind the bus driver, and the kids continued to pick on me and I ignored them. I made sure they realized that they weren't affecting me. Before they knew it was affecting me, I was pretty much like, "Oh my goodness, that's horrible, you're being mean." And now I had the strength to defend myself in a powerful way that was non-threatening and not violent, not returning violence for violence. So that's one story of mine that I felt that I was able to demonstrate resiliency and put myself back in a situation where I could grow and gain strength from and learn how to navigate in this culture to be able to blend and become a part of a more productive, more productive part of the culture. So that's one story that I can share with you among so many that I will share over the course of this podcast. So I'm really super excited for this journey, looking forward to hear from others, and certainly looking forward to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that I faced and how they helped me in my resiliency journey.
Thank you so much, Anika.
Yes.
Very, very difficult situation that you were talking about. I have so many questions for you going through my head.
Yeah.
I'm curious if Rob or Webb, have something.
Thank you, Paul. Anika, when I hear your story, sometimes I have regret that I left my public school. Sometimes I figured maybe I should have shown the perseverance that you did, and maybe I missed the opportunity to be more resilient. And I feel, I don't know if guilt's the right word, but sometimes there's regret. I had a great time in my public school, but I wonder if I missed out on a real important lesson, and maybe I just kind of, that wasn't a good move to take. I remember my parents and I having a long dialogue and conversation about whether or not I should leave my public school. So I really salute you in being, sticking to it, because it was I can relate, and I'm in awe of your ability to be so resilient in dealing with that.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I learned a lot through my growing up, my upbringing, that if I cower and walk away, then I'm not solving anything, and I'm certainly not helping myself grow. And to get to the places that I needed to go, I needed to grow, and I needed to, gain a level of toughness and ability to defend myself, again, not violently or threatening, but in a way that it's clear that I'm not going to cower, I'm not going to back down. So you can either make the way so I can get through in a nice way, or I'm still coming. So, and I had to do that throughout my life. So I realized the alternative just did not exist for me. Otherwise, I would just be, to most people and nobody. And that's where I would be sanctioning myself to be. So.
And Anika, you really point out so well the power of grit and perseverance in bringing people to a place of resilience, that sometimes it's hard to dig down that. And Rob, you also bring out a great point, is that there's a time and place for how people can express their resilience. Mm-hmm. And that just wasn't your time and place to show the kind of grit that Anika needed to at that moment. It doesn't mean that grittiness doesn't show up at a different time, in a different way, in a different place. It's still there. It's a matter of what's your time, what's your place, and how is your resilience being expressed at that moment.
Thank you for that therapy moment.
I tell you, I don't take my psychology hat off.
Beautiful. We're grateful to have you.
Thank you so much, Anika. Webb, do you want to share a little bit?
Oh, sure. I'll keep it on after Rob and Anika. I'm going to keep my resiliency story kind of on the lighter side. A couple of quick little vignettes. One of which I remember and one of which I don't. So the first vignette is, my sister and I always had a little bit of a conflicted relationship as we were growing up. She's about 2.5 years older than I am. And I guess there's just kind of that implicit competition that digs in at a young age. So she was in the bathroom. I was about 18 months old. She was in the bathroom, and I wanted to go in for whatever reason, and she did not want me to go in. So she slammed the door, and at that point, my thumb was in the hinge of the bathroom door, and it pretty much took off the end of my thumb on my right hand. And basically, from what I've been told, my hand had to be wrapped for 2 to 3 months, and I wasn't able to use my right hand. Well, as it turns out, I am now left-handed, and there is really no one else in my family who is left-handed. So in terms of adaptation, as I was growing up, I kind of have assumed, and I still kind of assume, that the reason that I became left-handed, is the fact that my right hand was not able to be used at a young age. So to me, that's kind of a tale of almost developmental, instinctual resiliency, almost like Anika was talking about. We think of kids as being resilient. You get banged up and you just keep on going.
Hey, Webb, do you think it might be that you have a different father?
I don't think so. From what I can tell,
that story.
That's right. From every indication, I don't think so. But hey, we all have skeletons, right? So, so I had a lot of those kinds of incidents in my childhood, from asthma for 3 years in which I couldn't breathe, and I remember a little bit of that. But I guess one of the more vivid experiences of resiliency that I had involving physical injury happened when I was 14, and I decided that I wanted to wrestle. I was on the high school wrestling team, and at my second meet, I went up against a guy who was bigger than me and much more experienced and much more capable than me. He grabbed me in a bear hug and lifted me and dropped me on my elbow, which broke the my arm between between the ball and the shaft of my shoulder. So it kind of snapped me at my growth plate. I remember at the time, like immediately, there wasn't a whole lot of pain. I kind of stood up and my arm was waving around, and I turned to my coach and I said, "Coach, there's something wrong with my arm." And around that time, the pain really started digging in. And I went to the hospital. I can remember very vividly them setting my arm. It actually involved a doctor and 3 attendants who came in, one of whom grabbed my legs, the other of whom grabbed my left side, the other of whom grabbed my head, and the doctor grabbed my arm and then started, basically numbed the area and then started manipulating my arm in all kinds of directions until after maybe 3 or 4 minutes, it popped into place. They did an x-ray. There was a muscle caught between the ball of my shoulder and my other bone. So I had to have a surgery scheduled. The surgery was scheduled for 2 days later. So that happened on a Wednesday, as I recall. The surgery was scheduled on a Friday. And I was a very idealistic 14-year-old growing up in, the age of just say no to drugs. So I decided that I did not want to take any opiates as a pain medicine. I rejected codeine. I was offered codeine. I rejected it. And so for 2 days, basically I watched my arm swell and I endured the pain that was involved in that. And during that period of time, I was, I was telling myself, like, very consciously, I can survive this. This will get better. This pain is temporary and it's transient, and I will get through this. But it was pretty agonizing, and it was actually impossible for me to lay down flat. If I laid down flat, the pain made it impossible for me to think even coherently. So for those 2 days, I kind of stuck to my guns in terms of avoiding the pain medicine and bore that pain. And again, I think of that every once in a while, just as an example of, I guess it is an example of determination. By the time I was 14, I already had beliefs about resiliency. I was I kind of had to have beliefs about resiliency. I broke my arm jumping out of trees and, got banged up in all kinds of ways. By 14, my beliefs about resiliency were very conscious in some senses. So that's just a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the things that I've gone through in terms of resiliency. I don't see those as particularly remarkable stories, just so you know. These are just kind of, I think more like everyday stories of resiliency. Compared to others, my stories of resiliency, I think, pale pretty, clearly in a lot of ways. So, but yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Yeah.
When did you wrestle again? Did you get back?
No, I didn't. No, I decided not to wrestle. What I did though is I had to recover. So my arm was in a sling for a month. Then I had to, the atrophy was horribly painful, actually. This was before the days that physical therapy was really the thing. This was in about 1985, something like that, 1984, 1985. So I installed a pulley on my ceiling myself and used a rope, and I would pull one arm to stretch my shoulder out. I did not wrestle again, but I did that spring throw the shot put and discus using my right arm. So using the arm that had been broken. So I decided that wrestling was probably not that great for me. I really wasn't very good at it anyway. Even beyond that break, but I was determined one way or another to get back into physical activity, and I did push myself to throw the shot put and discus. Again, it was just like that happened in December, I think, or January, and I was throwing shot put by February or March. It was something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Webb, I have to say, you mentioned your resiliency story pales in comparison, and I think the opposite, actually, because if you think of what I said earlier, when we say, oh, kids are so resilient, it's usually tied to stories like yours. When I've heard it anyway, my nephew he'd fall off of his bike and he gets right up and he gets back on the bike, and we say, oh, kids are so resilient. So that's the root of resiliency, right? It's just the same way in our bodies. Like if an artery or a vein, something isn't working right, our body or system tends to form collateral circulation, or it figures out another way to work. So there's resiliency in so many aspects of of our being, right? So I completely can resonate with your stories of resiliency, because that's a foundation in my mind. So awesome.
Right. Well, and also one thing that I find fascinating is that bones that have been broken and healed, or skin that has been cut and heals, is stronger than bone or skin that has never been harmed. And so not only do we heal, but we actually heal back on a physical level with greater strength.
Yes.
And I think that looking at that as a metaphor for resiliency is actually very powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Webb, I want to share my story. It's probably the opposite of being resilient. My time in wrestling goes like this. I'll never forget. It was my first match. I was in 8th grade, and I was still in that same public school that we spoke about. And a kid lifts his arm, and the BO was so bad that I said, "I'm out. I'm done." And that's it. He pinned me in 3 seconds, and I'm like, I'm not going back there. I can still smell it. So that's not resiliency.
Well, what really takes me about your story is how a life event took you from being a righty to a lefty with your sister, and then life and the universe threw something at you that made you jump back, and now all of a sudden you're throwing shot and discus with your right hand to balance you out. And I think what happened was that you took advantage of what the universe threw at you, and you're like, okay, I was a righty, I'm lefty. Let's go back to try and strengthen up my right side a little bit and create some balance in myself. And that there was an opportunity thrown at you by breaking your arm to then go and try to do something in a way that maybe naturally you would have been doing anyway. So, I find that you grabbed onto what the universe threw at you and you said, okay, I'm going to run with this. Is an incredible facet of resiliency.
Yeah. And I want to
thanks for that observation. Yeah.
There's biological resiliency, which is the body's ability to heal itself naturally. And there's this psychological resiliency. And I think your story embodies both. The grit and perseverance to want to heal, the actions that you took, and the body itself taking its time to meet the expectations that you set psychologically. And you also, and Paul spoke about, I think the mental agility, resiliency is tied to being able to change your sails, right? Like the wind you can't control, but the sails you can. And you're an example of that. So just to, piggyback on what Anika said, your story is truly not to be undermined by ours at all. It's an example of resiliency.
Well, I appreciate that.
Sure is.
Absolutely. So I'd like to share a tale of resiliency that a little different from the three of you, in that it was an adult tale of resiliency and happened about give or take 6 years ago. And I went to lunch with a couple of friends. I ride a motorcycle, so I was riding back, and all of a sudden I started seeing small dots in front of my eyes on the highway. And I thought that was kind of strange. And I've heard of floaters before. So I was like, oh, I got a couple of floaters. Get home and there's more, probably about a dozen. And I don't think very much of it. Things are just popping in front of my eyes. I figured I had some eye dirt that was just gotten shaken up. The next morning, it was a couple of dozen. And by the afternoon, it was many, many, many dots. It was like a kaleidoscope flying in front of my eye. My son, who at the time was probably about 25 years old, immediately goes to the Google machine and he's like, Dad, you got a problem here. And I go, what problem? He says, I think you have a detached retina. We've got the symptoms here. And I said, nah, no detached retina. I have no pain. I have no anything. In the meantime, I'm losing vision in my eye by the minute. And that kaleidoscope, which seemed kind of entertaining, all of a sudden was starting to look like a completely blocked vision. So I called up my old college roommate, who's an optometrist, and I called up my ophthalmologist. And both of them, with urgency in their voice, said, get to the emergency room immediately. It's like, it's dots. And they're like, now, don't wait, don't pass go, don't do anything, get to the emergency room. So I go to the emergency room. By the time I got there, I was completely blind. It was frosted glass, it was colors, it was things moving around, but I was blind in one eye. And I was told, yes, it was a detached retina. And I still didn't think it was that big of a deal. I'm in the emergency room and I'm watching other people. I'm seeing people have serious medical injury. And, the nurse is saying, read the chart across the room. And I'm like, I don't see a room. How could I read the chart? And she's like, okay, lay down, lay on your right side. Don't move. This is serious. And I'm like, it's my eye. How serious could it be? I was told that I needed surgery the next day. And in fact, I was by then completely blind. I did get a surgery. It was a gruesome surgery. I won't share that here. If anybody wants to look on YouTube of what they do for a detached retina, please make sure you have a strong stomach. Fortunately for anesthesia, I don't have much memory of any of it. When I got done, I was in a chair, like a massage chair, face down for the better part of 3 weeks. I couldn't see out of the eye. I couldn't move. I had to be face down 45 minutes of every hour. And then I can sit up, and then I'd have to go back down again. During that time, as I started standing up, I began to think about, there's a possibility that I'll be blind forever. And I was told there's a really good possibility if I got it in one eye, I'd probably get it in the other. It was most likely repeated injuries from doing martial arts. I was like, okay, let's practice this. So I would walk around my day. I would go to my office and go from my office to the administrative assistant that I work with's office with my eyes closed, counting paces, knowing when to make rights or left, knowing where the staircase is. I would walk down to the bathroom without opening my eyes, and I would be counting steps. I even started going to the gym and working out with my eyes closed. I would go on the treadmill. By the way, not easy to do a treadmill and an elliptical machine with your eyes closed. And you have to trust that the people around you aren't going to speed it up because they think you're just playing around by doing it with your eyes closed. So I'm trying not to cheat, but I'm not trusting some of the teenagers near me that they might actually send me flying. And I kept trying and trying other things and came to realize how much more powerful my other senses were. The first thing that being blind taught me a bit of was acceptance and commitment to the place I am. This is my life. This is where I am. It doesn't mean I can't improve it, but I can't sit there and yearn. I wish I wasn't blind, because if I did that, I would have gotten stuck. I would have gotten depressed. I would have gotten anxious. How am I going to get to work? How am I going to? I'm a psychologist. I do my job with my eyes. I have to see people. I teach. I have to read all the time. How am I going to do that? If I wasn't accepting of where I was, I wouldn't start thinking about alternatives. So acceptance became a huge, huge part of my recovery. The other thing that became a huge part of my recovery is having a different perspective than I've ever had before. And it really taught me to take a look at every situation that I was in and look at it from different sides, kick the box over, turn it upside down, pull it inside out, and see what it was all about. And I think the most powerful piece of going blind during this time was being present with myself, being present within myself, and being present in my own world. I always talked a lot about mindfulness, and I know that nowadays everything is mindfulness and eat your cereal mindfully. But I really came to understand what it meant to be fully present all the time, because I needed to be fully present all the time. And it took me down a journey towards mindfulness, which completely changed my worldview. It completely changed the way I look at other people. So because of this, I look at people differently. If I'm trying to be mindful and present, I'm always looking for what's the light in that other person that they're shining back at me, because that's the piece I can relate to. That's the piece that I can connect to. But if I don't see it, I miss it. So being blind actually helped me to see much, much clearer because it enhanced my ability to be mindful and present in the moment. So in a lot of ways, I don't wish this on anybody. Subsequent to that one surgery, there were all sorts of complications, and I ended up having multiple problems in my eyes, and both of them eventually, and ended up having 6 surgeries. Fortunately, I haven't had one in a few years now, and my vision is okay. On the other hand, going through this journey fundamentally changed who I am. I think made me a more resilient person, and most important, really made me relate and interact with my world differently.
Well, Paul, here's a question. You said that when you were at the emergency room, you were still thinking it wasn't such a big deal. Look at all of these really serious conditions that other people are going through. I guess I'm wondering what that social referencing piece, what role that played as you continued along that journey. Initially we can minimize what we're going through because we can inevitably find people who are struggling with something that appears to be worse than what we're struggling with. And I guess, like I said, I'm just curious about whether that awareness became part of the awareness that you maintained as you sought to see the light in others, and like that. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think there were 2 pieces to it. I think one, the emergency room set a different context. So when I had to look at the eye chart across the room, I was actually looking into people who were connected to EKGs and were perhaps having heart attacks and things like that. And at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, I see a kaleidoscope. You're having a heart attack.
Yes.
I can live with that. So the context made a big difference.
Sure.
The other piece of that, though, I think up until that point in time, I lived, despite other things that we'll discover through this podcast, I always was an eternal optimist, and that led me to having an air of invincibility. And we're not invincible. And I think going through this and that shift was, rather than being eternally optimistic about things that A, you can't change, and B, won't change, so you have to change a reaction to it, made me far more an optimistic realist. So I know what's there, and I'm optimistic about the world that's in front of me, as opposed to kind of everything will be okay. Well, everything's not okay for everybody. Right. But within your world, how could you make that okay? And I think that was a big shift that I made.
Yeah. I think that what you're talking about draws a really important distinction between kind of a mindset of resiliency and more of a Pollyannish kind of mindset of denial. Like, exactly. Everything will just be fine. That resiliency, I think, best emerges when we're deeply engaged. Yeah. And an attitude of denial or kind of glossing over things prevents us from engaging more deeply. So that's powerful. That's very powerful.
Thank you. Any as we begin to wrap up, any final thoughts or comments from anybody?
Well, we talked about, Paul, your story, and when Webb brought up the social referencing, I thought about the idea, the tagline of this show is somewhat humorously, we say, you think you've got problems. But that's sort of what happened to you. You looked at other people and you really embraced what it would be to be blind, as opposed to, shying away from it. And what I'm hearing, like this common theme, is sometimes you have to embrace what's not okay and play it out and be okay with that. And our knee action is not that. Our knee-jerk reaction is to avoid pain, to avoid things. And avoidance is not a good way of becoming resilient. You have to embrace, you have to accept, and you have to be willing to all possibilities. And your story embodies that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Any other closing thoughts?
I just want to say that I'm really excited about the podcast. I'm really excited about this endeavor. I look forward to continuing conversations, and I especially look forward to bringing in guests who have their own tales of resiliency. I think that this is going to be a wonderful experience. And I truly hope that we're able to make a difference for those who tune in.
Great. Anika, any parting words?
Yeah, very same. I am super excited for the upcoming weeks to hear and share in the resiliency stories of so many others. I'm just super excited. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you, and hearing your story is really giving me even more strength and thoughts about, as Rob said, and our tagline is, so you think you have problems. So when you think yours is this way, the next person's is this way, and whose is greater, or so I'm really excited.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to this also. I think over the next several episodes of this podcast, we're going to be hearing from people who've gone through dramatically different life experiences, and each one having a tremendous tale of resiliency. So I'm looking forward to hearing all of that. I'm looking forward to being part of this. I'm very much looking forward to continuing to be part of this great group here and to be able to continue to share, grow, and learn from all of you. So a little spontaneous thing, given my story, I just wanted to share with all of you that the light in me sees, acknowledges, and truly honors the light in all of you. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for sharing that light with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Same.